Well, welcome to the 700 Club. To bring prices down, the Federal Reserve has made a historic hike, approving the largest interest rate increase in nearly 30 years.
Well, that means Americans will pay more to borrow money. The increase affects credit cards, car loans, mortgage rates. Wendy Griffith has more.
As expected, Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell announced an interest rate increase of 0.75 of a point, the biggest in nearly 3 decades.
We at the Fed understand the hardship that high inflation is causing.
The board pursuing a series of rate hikes to bring down record high inflation. However, those moves delivering another blow to consumers as it raises the cost of borrowing. Credit cards' average APR is up over 20% for the first time. Mortgage loans were around 3% at the beginning of the year, now above 6%, pushing monthly payments hundreds of dollars higher. But the number one issue for most Americans remains the ever-increasing prices at the pump.
Everything is going up except our paychecks, and this is not right.
President Biden blaming the war in Russia and oil companies for high gas prices. He sent a letter to 7 oil executives threatening to invoke emergency powers if they don't increase production. His press secretary called on them to be patriotic.
We are calling on them to do the right thing, to be patriots here, and not to use the war as an excuse or as a reason to not put out a production.
But Republicans say Biden has done everything he can to limit oil production in pursuit of his agenda to convert America to green energy.
The president's executive orders have shut down the Extel pipeline. They have stopped the issuance of more leases. They've stopped the progress on the permitting of those leases, stopped the offshore oil production. The fact is we were energy independent.
Over the medium term, the critical thing is that we become more dependent on the wind and the sun that are not subject to geopolitical influences.
The Fed is expected to raise rates again in July, causing concern of tipping the economy into recession. While economists say a recession is not for certain, many believe it's becoming more likely. Wendy Griffith, CBN News.
And I'm one of those believing a recession is just around the corner. And if you look at the Federal Reserve notes, which is sort of a geeky thing to do, but if you look at them from yesterday's meeting, back in May, they said one of our goals is to maintain strong employment. They dropped that in yesterday's notes. So they're not trying to maintain strong employment. What they want above everything else is price stability. As a consumer, and particularly as a consumer of gas, when you fill up your car these days, you kind of choke. I applaud that, but at the same time, that we are going to tilt into a recession. What is going to happen is every CEO in the nation is going to start pulling back because they're looking at a very uncertain future. It's very hard to make determinations on return on investment in an unstable price environment. If all of your supplies to produce goods are going up, and they are because energy prices are the fundamental here, then you're going to pull back. That means you're not going to be hiring. That means a whole bunch of other things. So if you are employed, please stay that way. The strong job market is literally going to evaporate in front of our eyes. Now, what should the average consumer do? Number one, please get rid of all credit card debt. Once credit cards top 20% in interest, that is an unbelievable amount. And if you roll that over month over month and year over year, it means you're double paying for everything you put on that credit card. Now, I know in an inflationary environment, it's very tempting to do that because there's a whole lot more month than there is a paycheck. But please don't do that. Pay off that credit card because it will hurt you in the long run. The second is if you have an adjustable rate mortgage, please look at the terms on that. With mortgage rates now at 6%, my prediction is the Federal Reserve isn't going to stop here at 3/4 and say we're done. They're going to continue to increase interest rates, which means if you're in one of those 3-year or 5-year or 7-year adjustable rate mortgages, expect that mortgage payment to go way up Now, when you do have it go way up, you're not going to be able to sell in a very tight housing market because those interest rates are so high. Just a few months ago, long-term 30-year mortgages were in the 3% range. Today, they're in the 6% range. So say $400,000 of a mortgage, that's an extra $12,000 a year in mortgage payments, and you multiply that over the 30-year mortgage, that's $360,000. That's a lot of money, and that's really going to discourage home buyers, particularly first-time home buyers. So if you're in an ARM, see if you can lock in. I know it may be difficult to say I want to lock in at 6, but in what's it going to be 2 years from now, 3 years from now? I lived in the Paul Volcker days, and he was the champion trying to have price stability. Interest rates rose way above 15%. I mean, it was absolutely incredible. You could get a 30-year federal bond that paid 15%. So those are days where no one was able to buy a home because the interest rates were just sky high. That was what the Fed did, the Federal Reserve did to stop inflation. So look at history, look at what's coming, and please protect your own economy because it looks like the guys in Washington don't have a clue. In other news, close your doors or become a target. Pro-abortion radicals made this threat and declared open season on crisis pregnancy centers. Ephraim Graham has more from the CBN newsroom. Ephraim?
Gordon, the warning came in a statement released under the name Jane's Revenge. Those words have been found at the site of attacks against crisis pregnancy centers and other pro-life groups. The statement said, "We are not one group but many," and claimed responsibility for attacks in more than a dozen cities. It goes on to say, from here forward, any anti-choice group who closes its doors and stops operating will no longer be a target. But until you do, it's open season, and we know where your operations are. The Biden administration, which had been silent about the attacks, condemned the threat Wednesday. A White House press secretary told the Daily Wire violence and destruction of property have no place in our country under any circumstances, and the president denounces this. 122 Republican House members sent a letter to Attorney General Merrick Garland calling for an investigation into these attacks. President Biden is using his executive authority to target state laws curbing LGBTQ initiatives in public schools, announcing an executive order that seeks to combat state laws prohibiting transgender athletes from participating in girls' sports and targeting policies like Florida's parental rights law that prevents discussion of sexual orientation or gender identity in grades K through 3. It also directs federal agencies to expand access to, quote, gender-affirming medical care for young people. Sexual abuse and holding offenders accountable played a major role in the Southern Baptist Convention's annual meeting this week. The denomination also elected a new president. He's a small church pastor and social media pro who arrives at an historic moment. Heather Sells has more on Pastor Bart Barber and his vision for the future.
Barber did not mince words, calling predators wolves who are going after sheep in Southern Baptist churches.
Sexual predators have used our decentralized polity to try to turn our churches into a hunting ground.
And now Southern Baptists have signaled they're ready for reform.
It's time for Southern Baptists to realize how nimble and resilient our Baptist polity can be to put sexual predators on notice that Southern Baptist churches are a dangerous place for them.
At his first press conference, Barber cast a vision for taking on the predators while candidly acknowledging another denominational hazard, infighting.
Every way that I've served Southern Baptists has left scars. Every way that I've done it. Hey, good morning, everybody. Bart Barber.
Still, Barber is known for his relentless optimism that translates in person and online.
He's positive. He's encouraging. Bart just pulls out his phone and does videos every day. I think you're seeing a shift culturally in the convention and culture where people are, some people even say more of a mini church movement, intimacy, things like that. And so I think that Bart resonates with a lot of this new generation of Southern Baptists.
shooting back to try to own them does not solve the problem.
In a country worn down from a pandemic, politics, and mass shootings, he's adamant that there's never been a better time to share the gospel.
Barber's first priority is naming a new abuse task force. He's vowed to work quickly to build a diverse group that will recommend new reforms that Southern Baptists can consider. Reporting in Anaheim, Heather Sells, CBN News.
The convention also presented 64 new missionaries for work overseas, and those messengers affirmed their commitment to continue spreading the gospel worldwide. The U.S. has long been a global leader in technology and innovation. Now, former Pentagon officials are sounding the alarm. China is rapidly catching up, and if we don't take action now, we could lose our advantage. CBN national security correspondent Caitlin Burke reports.
There's a high-tech battle going on between the U.S. and China with much at stake. Now, experts are speaking out, concerned the U.S. isn't currently competing enough to come out on top.
We're getting behind in really the sectors in cyber and AI/ML that are the most important to win the next battle.
Nick Chalon filled the role as the first chief software officer of the Air Force and Space Force. He resigned last September over his concern regarding U.S. complacency.
You see China, for example, doing 200 hypersonic launches versus 10 in the United States. That's obviously very alarming. And then you hear the chairman of the Joint Staff say that it's only almost a Sputnik moment.
That's a sort of a clear example of risk-taking and speed that China's been taking, whereas the risk aversion that we have here to be able to experiment and try something new on the government side has been a real challenge.
Preston Dunlap is another high-tech defense official who basically followed Chalon's lead. Dunlap served as the inaugural chief architect officer of the Air Force and Space Force, and both men agree that to maintain technological dominance, the U.S. must act now.
When it comes to the compounded evolution of AI, there's a point where you can't physically catch up because we're dealing with a nation of 1.4 billion people, massive volume of data, and the more data you get in AI, the better the AI can learn and get better and stronger with time.
I do think now is the time to begin to pivot and change that curve, because it takes a while to turn an aircraft carrier. It takes a while to turn the technological pace that we have here in the nation.
Chalon estimates that if tremendous progress isn't made within the next 6 months, keeping up won't be the issue. The U.S. will face the challenge of catching up. Caitlin Burke, CBN News, Washington.
Certainly don't want to get in a situation of catching up. Gordon?
I think we're already there. The hypersonic missiles that they launched, it caught the entire defense establishment in the United States by surprise. They had no idea that China was even working on that technology. And then they detected this launch, and it was a missile that could come from our southern border, which would be unable to be tracked by anything we currently have. Everything we have is designed to cover things that are coming from the North Pole, and for things to come in from the south was a complete surprise. So it shouldn't be a shock to anyone that we're behind China in this technological race for effective AI. And is it 6 months? Is it 12 months? What is this time frame? I don't think we have a really good idea. Under the current administration, though, we seem to be cutting defense spending. And when you do that in an inflationary environment, it's like a double cut. So are we going to see any kind of change coming out of Washington? Don't hold your breath.